Okay, so we are now recording everyone, and today we are welcoming David Mylark to learn about the importance of archiving the genetics of the world's last old growth forest giants for future scientific research, providing educational opportunities to propagate the propagators, promoting historic botany projects, and raising public awareness in order to restore our arboricultural heritage for future generations. David and his sons Jared and Jake founded the nonprofit Champion Tree Project, which evolved into the 501c3 Archangel Ancient Tree Archive in 2007. Together they have, whoops, I got another couple coming in here. Hang on just a second. I'll give them a minute to join. I probably started prematurely there, but we're eager to get going. So, all right, here they come. So, at any rate, together, David, his sons Jared and Jake have traveled across the globe to collect cuttings from ancient trees and clone them to save their genetics, eventually planting them back in the wild. David Mylark is the third generation nurseryman with over 40 years of experience in growing and supplying landscape trees for resale for the national market. Through the years, he's aware of the longevity of trees planted in urban areas was declining, and his interest in extending the lifespan of these trees by introducing the genetics of old growth trees was a passion he followed. Thank God. Mylark has been awarded the following honors: Detroit News Michiganian of the Year, Grant Thornton Leader and Innovator Award, Garden Clubs of America Distinguished Service Award, National Daughters of the American Revolution, National Conservation Medal, the National Garden Club's Award of Excellence for Conservation, Biography Magazine's Hero Award, and the Garden Clubs of America Zone X highest award for conservation. Archangel Ancient Tree Archive has also garnered global media coverage for close to nearly 2 decades. That's quite a mouthful, and I am pleased to present David, who is going to wow us about ancient trees. So go, David.
Well, good morning, everybody, wherever you're listening from or viewing from. We're coming from the thriving metropolis of Coatnish, Michigan, population 160. We're about 5 miles from Crystal Mountain Ski Lodge. And we have one of the dubious honors of being one of the most impoverished villages in northern Michigan. But be that as it may, our grandchildren, we have 4 grandchildren, my wife and I. They're the 6th generation here in Coatnish. So we've been here a long, long time. And just as a side note, Coatnish is an Ojibwe, Chippewa word that means big beech tree. And the first European settlers, your great-great-grandparents, who settled northern Michigan first, traded under that big beech tree here in Coatnish. And I've been told without their help and guidance, we never would have made the first few winters. So that's how this place got its name. And it's kind of a beautiful spring morning out there, even though it's winter. So I think, like most people, we're talking about the weather a lot, about the increase in temperatures, drought, not just around the country, but here in northern Michigan. And I have a question for you. We know it's 10 to 30 degrees warmer this winter than normal, according to the weather maps. What if we have a summer that is 10 to 30 degrees hotter than normal? What will that do to our gardens, our food crops? What will that do to our nurseries? What will that do to the fruit industry? So I hope things cool off and stay more moist this summer than what I fear might happen, because 90 to 100-degree days in sequence here in northern Michigan is going to be tough on all living things, is it not? So what we're doing, why are we doing what we're doing? Well, my father started the wholesale shade tree nursery industry here in Coatnish back in 1964 with J. Frank Schmidt from Schmidt's Nursery in Oregon, or how to grow shade trees in a nursery, so you didn't have to take shovels and go along the edges of woods and dig things up by hand. So they pioneered shade tree production. I was in high school at that time, and my whole life I've been on the cutting edge of pioneering shade tree production for the country. I no longer do that because the project has grown in size. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, Archangel. But we noticed about 20 years ago that the nursery trees that we grew, for our substance, food, shelter and things started to die. And nobody really knew why the trees that we grew for so many decades were starting to die. But to make a long story short, SO2s and our friends with a coal-fired power plant west of Michigan, all the way to China, we found out that as the coal-fired power plants spewed out what they do, they come over Lake Michigan, they condensate or get colder and drop. Mercury is the only heavy metal that can be a gas and a liquid. And we found out that the mercury and SO2 pollution on our native forests and all living things is not a very good thing. It weakened the trees' immune systems, and the immune systems couldn't hold up, and trees started dying down the road. Plus the influence of all the diseases that were brought from all different parts of the world into our Great Lakes region. And so our started to decline. The shade tree industry was in real trouble. And we started eliminating which trees we could grow for the cities and for the nurseries. As you probably know, the elms, the oaks, the birches, those are already a thing of the past because of the diseases. So what are we going to plant? Here we all are. What are we going to plant for the next 50 years that will be able to withstand the projected increase in temperature, the projected decrease in rainfall, and what will be tough enough and strong enough to survive? Here's another fact that you can check out. 98% of our old growth forests in the United States have been cut down. There's only 2% of our old growth forests left. In the West, the coast redwoods, 96% of all old growth redwoods have been cut down. That leaves us 4% of the largest and only redwood forest in the world. So as we began to contemplate with other experts, what was the problem? We said, well, perhaps we should start implementing and utilizing native trees that have a natural resistance to diseases. They have longevity, and stop planting trees, which I call pink poodles, trees that we're growing for the nursery industry and planting in our cities purely upon leaf color, like Crimson King, or pretty flowers, like our flowering crab apples. Switch away from those, which have no benefit to any of the pollinators, the butterflies, the bees, or things, or for our mammals. That they don't make a sustainable habitat in our urban areas. Let's start to use more native trees. And while we're at it, why don't we use the largest and oldest native trees, the living survivors, and utilize those genetics? It had never been thought of before. So 30 years ago, as a family, we sat down and said, hey, Northern Michigan has about a dozen national champion tree species, ashes, maples, and why don't we try and clone those? Wouldn't they survive better? Wouldn't they last longer? If climate change 30 years ago, which projected, if it ever does come, maybe they'll fare. So that's why, out of necessity, we started the project. It started to go here in Northern Michigan, then the country, and then over in Europe, and find the largest and oldest trees of their species, the champions, the measured largest and oldest, and start to try and clone those trees and preserve the genetics to be utilized. Well, we found out that nobody had ever done that. And we found out that most universities we called for advice on how to do that said, well, the trees in Northern Michigan are of no value, even if it could work, because the old trees, they won't allow you to clone those. It's like asking a 100-year-old woman to bear a child. It won't work. Excuse me, that's our telephone. And so we didn't listen to them, and we tried. And lo and behold, we asked for the aid of the big nurseries out in Oregon. And with their help, we were able to start to bring on the champions, or the measured largest and oldest of some of the species of northern Michigan trees, like the white ash that's over in Elk Rapids, like the sugar maple that's in Bear Lake. And we were able to clone those in the nurseries to preserve the genetics of those trees in archival living libraries. So far in 30 years, we've done about 130 different species of trees from the United States and the UK. And in the last 10 years, we've been zeroed in on coast redwoods and giant sequoias from the West Coast. And we spent a lot of time and energy and money combing the 500-mile range on foot and by cars of the coast redwoods to find the 100 largest and oldest living specimens of coast redwoods. Then we went 700 miles south down the Sierra Nevadas and looked for the lost groves and most ancient giant sequoias. Voila, we found them. We found giant sequoias that are over 3,000 years old and over 30 foot wide at the trunk. That's 4 feet above ground level. By the way, General Sherman, which they say is the largest sequoia, it's not, it's 27 feet. And in Northern California, we found coast redwoods, which are taught in our universities are the tallest trees on earth, but not the biggest or the widest trunk. We found stumps of trees that were cut down in the 1860s of trees 35 foot across the trunk. So coast redwoods are and were the largest, oldest living trees on earth, especially here in the United States. And nobody knew that because they were cut down and lost 150 years ago or so. So we tried to clone those stumps. There was still life in those stumps, and I'm happy to say we have 11 coast redwoods, all in excess of 30-foot diameter trunks, 4 feet above ground level, that we've successfully cloned. Now, I've been talking a long time. I know how boring it is to listen to somebody, drone on and on and on. So why don't we see a little video? And I think that will help clear up who we are, why we're doing it, and why it's so doggone important to everybody at this time. So here's a map. No, which one are we going to start at? This one here. All righty. Here's one of our short videos. I think. Bear with us.
Hang on a minute, I'm looking for it. I had it right up here and now it's gone.
It's funny how that happened.
Our video. Hopefully it's right here.
We've got a lot of videos. If you ever would.
You do. Am I going to find the right one here?
I don't know.
Okay, hang on a minute. Here we go. Got it.
All right, let's try that one. Now we need volume. Why don't we try and start it again with volume? I can't hear anything, and hopefully maybe you can. Nope. No volume. I just let it. This happen. I didn't touch the volume.
Wow, did the audio not work? Did the video not work? What happened here?
I saw video and no audio at all.
Okay, how about this? For everyone, I will send a link to that video so you can watch it. Okay?
I think it puts a pretty clear picture of why we're doing what we're doing. With 98% of our old growth forest gone, and
Oops, let
climate
me get
change.
that. Oh, crap.
There we are. There's a map. Hopefully you can hear me. That's a map that I found on Facebook a few days ago, and perhaps some of you saw that also. But that's a map of, I believe, from 1620, the way our country used to be forested, from the East Coast to the West Coast. And the dark color there on it is the forest that was here when the first Europeans came. The bottom map is the current old growth forest or forest that we have in the United States today. So in essence, we have cut down 98% of our old growth forest. The tragedy there is we cut them down before we studied them, or we even understood what they really do, not just to help humans, but to help all living things. It's true, the lungs, trees are the lungs of the earth. They purify our water, our air. They make this place habitable. There are aerosols from these ancient trees that are very health giving for benefits, not just for humans, but mammals and fishes. And now we're heading into this climate change challenge where it's going to get increasingly hot and dry. The ice caps are melting at twice the rate that scientists predicted. Sea levels rising. The Atlantic Ocean is warming to where the Atlantic current is threatened to stop moving. And so what do we do? What have we done? And what can we do? In essence, we need to put the old growth forests back. We need to reforest this planet to help cool the planet, to help cool the earth, to help clean the water and the air, to put the pollinators back in business with pollen from the trees that we destroyed. Or if we don't all get busy and start to reforest and replant all the earth right now, it looks pretty grim for our grandchildren to have a future here on earth. I don't like the gloom and the doom, but I think if you take any climate science maps, if you take any of the projected tipping points environmentally, we are either at or very close to tipping points in many of the critical areas that keep life on this planet possible. So 30 years ago, as a shade tree grower, was growing the wrong trees for the reasons purely economic, because they had a pretty color leaf or a pretty flower, but they really did not add to the benefit of our ecosystems. But it was the trees that the nursery industry were saying that we needed to reforest our urban areas and our cities where we destroyed the entire ecosystem. So going from that map on the top, the black, to the bottom map, that's our challenge. We all need to, every single one of us, even our children and our schools, need to start reforesting this country and this planet in earnest. And if we don't do that for any reasons at all, I think it's going to be much to the chagrin of our grandchildren and their future 30 to 50 years from now. So that's basically who we are. That's why we're doing it. That's why we're doing it with old growth genetics. And anyone that cares to read about why old growth forest genetics are so critical at this time, I have a white paper from Morton Arboretum in Lisle, Illinois. This white paper was put out in 2022, and it suggests, the new research suggests that ancient trees possess far more than an awe-inspiring presence and a suite of ecological services to the forest. They also sustain the entire population of trees' ability to adapt to the rapidly changing environment. So new science, led by Morton Arboretum, suggests that only old growth forest genetics have the memory in their DNA to remember times of drought and times of fire in the last 10,000 years. And it is in that genetic DNA memory that they can pull forward to now. So as we experience more drought and more heat and more fires, they have a built-in resistance to be able to withstand that, much greater than the trees that we're planting that don't hold old growth forest genetics. So that doesn't mean that we go out and replant all of Michigan with old growth forest trees, because we don't want we want genetic diversity. So here at Archangel, we suggest you only use 10% of old growth forest genetic clones to 90% seedlings, so we retain that genetic diversity. You can go on our site, archangelancienttrees.org, or for those that would like to know more about the genetics, the science, a New York Times Science Times reporter wrote a book, Jim Robbins, 10 years ago, and this is that book, The Man Who Planted Trees by Jim Robbins. He is a great writer. That book is footnoted, and all the science from around the world that he gathered for the writing of the book about our work is in there in footnotes. And there's some amazing new science on how trees communicate with each other. They communicate with humans, how we can bring back our ecosystems, the coral reefs. There's new research in Japan. When you put the trees back along the coastline and the shrubs and plants, miraculously, the coral reefs offshore come back alive. So there's a symbiotic relationship between coral reefs and their decline, fish decline for a lack of pollen from the trees that supply the natural immunity for their immune systems of the baby fish. It's a fascinating book. And if you're serious at all about trees, I suggest you get The Man Who Planted Trees by Jim Robbins. And I think next, why don't we ask if anybody's got a couple of questions or any questions so far, then we'll take a tour, a walking tour inside our propagation facility here in Coltmish. And we'll show you how we do what we do. And we'll show you how we have been able to make the material to start to rebuild the world's first old growth forest, which we have. We're rebuilding giant sequoia and coast redwood old growth forests with old growth forest genetics for the first time in the history of the world. We can do that here in Michigan. In Michigan, we destroyed 63 million acres of white pine forests, the largest white pine forest on the planet. We kept every single old growth forest white pine down that I know of. There was one found about 12 years ago by a ranger in the Porcupine Mountains, deep in a valley, a true old growth white pine. That's the only one that I know of. The rest we destroyed before we studied them and before we understood the utilization of what they did for us and the planet. So we made lots of mistakes, all of us, our fathers, our grandfathers. But that doesn't mean we have to stop there, does it? We need to get busy and put them back. And that's what we hope to be a model for the world, is to show people how you can become a model and start to rebuild and put back our old growth forests. So on that note, does anybody have any questions that I might be able to answer before we go on our tour? No questions. That's interesting.
So we had questions in the chat.
Yes.
Someone asked, where can we get seedlings to plant? And are you still looking for clonable trees in Michigan? How about Hartwick Pines Park?
Yes. Okay. Seedlings you can get from their county extension agents. They know where
That's
to get.
right, right here, right here.
That's where you get seedlings. But clones, the world's only clones of the largest and oldest trees, including some Michigan trees, is at Archangel Ancient Trees here in Coltmish. Are we still looking? So far, the state forests and the federal forests have not allowed us to go on their lands and clone any of their trees. Even though we as taxpayers and citizens own our state and federal forests, we've not been allowed to go on and clone any of their trees. So I believe Hartwick Pines is a state forest. I believe that it is second growth. It is not virgin old growth trees. And I believe the state of Michigan has changed the definition of old growth to any tree 200 years old or older. Because there are there's virtually very, very few, a handful of any species of Michigan trees that are truly old growth. So hopefully that answers that question. Any other questions? No questions? All right. Let's take a little tour, shall we?
Whoops, hang on, David. There was one more question. Two more came in. One is, what about the Estevan pines in Keweenaw? And are there any native chestnut trees in northern Michigan?
I do not know about the Estevan pines in the UP. I've not been there and I don't know about them. They might be old growth, I'm not sure. So if you have any information with measurements and pictures of those trees, because a lot of trees are misidentified, mismeasured, and we found that all over this country and all over Europe. People guess at the height and the width, and they guess at what the species, and they guess at the age. So if anybody has some hard data, scientific data on those pines, the Estevan pines, we would love to know about it. And the second question, what was the second part?
Are there any native chestnut trees in northern Michigan?
I do not know. I know that there's a chestnut society I've heard about in Cadillac that's been working with them. I only knew one old growth chestnut that we tried to clone about 6 or 8 years ago. It was down in Marilla, Michigan, and it contracted the disease and it died. But to my knowledge, no one's come forward and said we have an old growth chestnut in northern Michigan. There might be, but not that we know of. Those are good questions.
James is reporting that there is a very old chestnut in Antrim County, so maybe I'll suggest that James and our forester and I can go see it if he knows where it's at with property, permission from the property holder.
Yep, that's critical. And then take a tape measure, a 50-foot tape measure, and measure 4.5 feet above ground level. So put the end of the tape on the ground, measure it 4.5 feet on the trunk, and then measure the circumference of that trunk. And you divide that, and that'll give the width of the trunk accurately. And then you can measure from the edge of the drip edge of the crown on the ground, just, eyeball it straight down and measure the crown spread. And then without an inclinometer, you'll have to guess at the height. But we like to do things with scientific data. We'd love to know if there is one that's been resistant and made it through the destruction from the disease. Great question.
All right, James. I please call me, James, or email me or whatever it takes. Let's go figure this out. Thank you. And one more question, David, from Chris. It's how do you go about cloning a tree? Is it slips or seeds or something else?
Well, seeds are not cloning. Seeds take two parents like humans. Most all trees need a male and a female. And when you get a seed, it's a combination of who knows, where the pollen that pollinated that tree came from. So cloning is just what that is of the parent tree. There's 3 ways to clone a tree. 1, through rooted cuttings. 2 is through tissue culture or micropropagation. And we have a lab here. I'm not able to show you that today. It's in another building, but if you come down on a tour, we have a state-of-the-art micropropagation lab that's up and running, and we can show you that method. And then the third method is air layering, where 2 branches come together, then they grow together. But that's a great question to segue on our tour of where we're at. This is Jesse. Jesse works at Archangel, and he's my right hand. My is Jesse Ketchum. And Jesse's going to hold this iPad, and I'm going to walk around a little bit. And let's start here. Here's what micropropagation tubes look like. That's a 3,000-year-old giant sequoia that was probably 1/4 of an inch piece put in there 6 months ago. You can see it's outgrown this jar. And so I'm holding in my hand a 3,000-year-old giant sequoia. And I'm happy to say we can do thousands of these in the micropropagation lab per year. And as they multiply out and expand, we can do millions and millions and millions of old growth forest trees in labs all over the world. So yes, it's possible to make billions and billions of trees utilizing old growth forest genetics in micropropagation labs. It's a great hope for our future. Here is where we have tree school, this big table here. And we bring school kids in from 5th or 6th grade through high school, and we teach them how to make cuttings, which is one of the methods of cloning the trees. We teach them how to do what we do. And when they get done making those, we put them in this mist chamber. Our mist chambers have 8 seconds of mist once an hour. They're temperature controlled, and these are some of the 2,000 to 3,000 year old ghost redwoods, giant sequoias. Jesse, what are these here? These are
The Leland Cottonwood.
the Leland cottonwood, the largest cottonwood, the champion cottonwood that was in Leland on the way to Fishtown that they cut down 6 or 8 years ago. This is the Leland cottonwood in vitro because cottonwoods and aspens are the greatest phytoremediation tools for dry land or sandy soils that we have. Like so for environmental disasters like gas station sites that have leaked, some of them Superfund sites, they're starting to utilize millions and millions of cottonwoods and aspens to phytoremediate or pull out of the soil the toxins. Last week we were in Florida cloning live oaks and 2,000-year-old cypress. And these are some of the trees that we brought back last week from our cloning efforts in Florida of live oaks and cypress. Most people don't realize that there are 2,000 to 3,000 year old cypress in Florida. 15 to 20 foot in diameter trunks are as big as the redwoods of California. So yes, Florida's cypress forest that would primarily all cut down did have trees as big as the redwoods of California. We're finding the largest and oldest ones in Louisiana, Georgia, and Florida. Cloning those to preserve the genetics so we can make millions and millions of those and help reforest Florida, put back their cypress forest. Here is one of our favorite trees. This is black willow. That's a native tree to Michigan. The black willows range is from Nova Scotia all the way down the East Coast to Central Florida. From the East Coast all the way over to the Mississippi River into Texas. It's got a wide range and it's probably the greatest tree for phytoremediating mercury, all 4 dioxins, and toxic poisons out of our water and our groundwater. Black willows. In that book that I showed you, The Man Who Planted Trees by Jim Robbins, Jim covered one chapter on black willows and the great promise that they hold for cleaning up the toxins in our water. And trust me, we've done some sediment samples of Lake Michigan sediments and the Boardman River in Traverse City. And the worst nightmares of the dioxins, the mercuries, the spray dopes from the fruit industry. Yes, they're in there. They're in those sediments and in our groundwater and heading for the bays. So I would guess you have the same challenges. And this tree shows great promise, as well as the cottonwoods and the aspens, for phytoremediating that out of our soil, keeping it out of our children's bodies. So this is one of our cutting beds. There's about 8,000 trees per bed. And we'll go over this way. So when these get bigger or big enough, we transfer them into this size. This is a coast redwood. We've done about 60 different coast redwoods from the largest and oldest redwoods in that 500-mile range. And these are 3,000-year-old sequoias. But as you probably well know, there is a huge giant sequoia down in Manistee that is 110 feet tall, 5 foot across the trunk, and thriving in Manistee. So we've been working with giant sequoias, the largest and oldest, 2,000 to 3,000 years old, and the one in Manistee to start to rebuild giant sequoia forests all over the United States. There's over 40 cities in the Puget Sound area that are utilizing our redwoods and sequoias and reforesting the greater Seattle area with our material that we've done. And why are they doing that? Because, my friends, these trees, which let's go over here and we'll show you a little next page or next stage. Here you can see where they're progressively getting bigger and bigger, and then we'll go into the other room. These trees right here sequester CO2 10 times faster than our trees here in Michigan. And these are from 2,000 to 3,000 year old trees that are still living. And so we're planting it forward. Whoever utilizes these trees potentially are planting it forward for the next 2,000 years. Trees that will sequester CO2 out of the air, produce oxygen, clean our groundwater, and we'll be paying it forward with those forests for over 2,000 years, unless it gets too hot and dry or somebody cuts them down. Here's the black willows that we saw as new cuttings. These are about 2 months old, and they're on their way to the size that we distribute for people to plant on your rivers and your lakes and your watersheds. Here's the size black willows that we give up. And these are from the national champion in Traverse City, are the largest measured black willow in the country. So genetically, they're the biggest in the O's. And we'll move over here. Over here. We're doing a live stream.
I'm sorry.
These are Monterey cypress. And this is from the largest Monterey cypress in California. That cypress is almost 20 feet across the trunk. It's the champion. And so we're doing all different kinds of species of trees here. And we'll go into the next room and we'll show you the bigger trees that we take the cuttings of. Hopefully you're enjoying it. Here are the parent trees. These are the trees that we first cloned 10 or 12 years ago in California. Each one of these is from a different tree. And each one of these trees is among the largest and oldest living coast redwoods on earth. And some of these, 11 different of these trees, are from stumps that we found that were lost from trees whose trunks are 30 to 35 foot across. So we've painted this line on the floor here to show our guests and our visitors how big is a 35 foot diameter trunk. So this green line, Jesse will stand here and I'll go down the other end. Here's another edge of a 35 foot diameter tree, which is the size of these trees that you're looking at. We painted this on so school children and visitors can see that's how big a trunk of trees that these parent trees, these clones of the parent trees are. Then you say, well, what size do you ship them at? This is the size tree that we found, 24 to 30 inches. Well, they have a root system on it that we ship all over the United States, Europe, New Zealand. Here's the root system. They have a prolific root system, which really helps get them going. And you can't hardly kill this tree. I mean, you can ship this anywhere in the world, and they are tough. So far, we've shipped, I'm guessing, 50 to 100,000 coast redwoods to New Zealand, Australia, England, France, the Netherlands, Ireland, British Columbia, and the Western United States and other areas. That's where we're beginning to rebuild old growth redwood forests. So maybe that gives you a little idea of who we are and what we do. And I would invite every single one of you down to come and take a tour. But please come in a group. Please call ahead so we know that you're coming, and we would welcome you to go through our facility. Our tissue culture lab is state of the art. I think you really like that, but that's over another building and we can't Zoom that without shutting this off. And on that note, let's go back and I'll open it up to the questions.
But that, everybody, who all wants to go? Let's go. We could jump in the car and go right now. Fascinating.
There we are. Let's try this. Forwards and backwards. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it showed you a little bit about who we are, what we do, and why we're doing it. In a nutshell, people have said, David, why do you do this? You know, why have you been doing this for 30 years? Your family, people all over the country and the world. We're literally working for the world's grandchildren. That's what keeps us going. You know, if you look towards the government, if you look towards corporate America to save us from what we're heading into and what we're doing, we're not going to make it. Okay. They're too preoccupied with money. They're too preoccupied with the power struggles. They're too preoccupied with a lot of things. And it's going to take a grassroots movement of action, not talk. The time for preservation is over. It's time for restoration if we're going to make it out of this thing alive, our grandchildren. There is a lot of renowned scientists, 10,000 scientists that have signed documents saying we don't have 100 years on this planet as a species. Some are saying we might not have 50 years on this planet as a species at the rate of decline that we're going. Well, I invite you to help us. I help you to help yourselves by starting to replant and reforest your area, your yard, your schoolyards, right where you're at. And if we have a grassroots movement where everybody does just a little bit to help reforest this planet, at the very least, when we leave the planet, we can say, well, we tried. Okay, but at the very best, I think that it can do a lot to reverse climate change. It is possible to go after and reverse climate change. That would be another whole hour's talk based on science, but we're not done yet. We don't have any more time to pontificate or to postulate whether we need to reforest the planet. We just need to get busy and do it. And that's what we're trying to encourage the world. We're trying to encourage school groups to come and visit, conservation groups, and try and encourage them to start to take action. Take action right where you're at. Take action for your kids and your grandkids, because if you don't, we're pretty sure we're going to know that where it's going to end up. But we don't have to end up that way if we all do our part. And so perhaps you'll think about working for the world's grandchildren as well as yours. And that's what we're all about. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm getting a little hoarse. I hope this time, your time and our time, would encourage you on a really beautiful, warm spring day that isn't, because it's winter. And hopefully we don't get 20 to 30 degrees above normal temperatures all this summer.
Oh, boy.
Like it is right now. Texas has 180,000 square mile fire going. Let me repeat that. Texas has 180,000 square mile fire going, 5 fires, 15% contained. Our Southwest is running out of water. Make no mistake. The Southwest is running out of water. We'll see today, soon, where water's rationed in LA, San Diego, Reno, Las Vegas. Because simply we pumped the aquifers and drained the rivers, and it ain't snowing, folks, like it used to. So it's time, and hopefully I encourage you to do this. Please get the book, The Man Who Planted Trees. We don't get a royalty on it, but the science in there, it gives you hard science by one of the greatest science reporters of where we're really at. And if anybody has a question or two, we've got a few minutes. I thank you for
Yep.
your time and your patience.
David, you have certainly been an inspiration. We will get a carload of Antrim County people down there at the end of April, early May.
All
And
right.
we do have some questions on the book here for you. So getting started, Katie wonders, what is the cost of a single black willow, for example?
We produce several thousand a year and we give them away. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We raise funds in the area or people that come and visit. And if you feel so inclined, you could leave a donation in one of our donation boxes so we can make several thousand more for you and your kids to plant wherever you're coming from.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. And Linda wonders, are there any concerns about planting these trees where they are not native?
Absolutely. There's invasive species issues. There are a lot of really hard and fast issues. But I would ask anybody that's watching this or listening to this, in 50 years, what are going to be the native trees in Michigan? Our climate is supposed to be that of Arkansas in northern Michigan. The climate of Arkansas, right here. What will be the native trees in that sort of climate? And then I ask you, which trees are native to Michigan? And I think most people suffer from, like I did, geographic amnesia. We forget that we're sitting under 2 miles of ice 11,000 years ago. So there was 2 miles of ice where you're at, where I'm at, for a long time. And until that melted, and when it melted, which trees were native to Michigan? 0. So every tree that we have here in Michigan migrated from somewhere after the 2 miles of ice that we were all under receded. So there's lots of questions about that. Native trees within a reasonable amount of the range is always practical, but you have to factor in the increase in temperatures that's projected for northern Michigan, Arkansas weather. Okay, and then there are fossilized records of giant sequoias all over the world, including Michigan, including Minnesota. So if you Google up giant sequoia fossilized records, you'll see that they used to grow here. I can tell you, they're growing really well in Manistee. 5 foot in diameter, 110 feet tall, and they were planted in 1948. I was born in 49 and they were planted the year before. So giant sequoias planted in mass as CO2 repositories for sucking CO2 out of the air and producing oxygen is wise because they do it about 10 times faster than native species of trees. I see that my battery's getting low on my iPad. I hope I don't blink off.
Okay, we have one more. How do you track your clone trees and how they're doing if they're planted in another country like Australia?
We ask the people that plant them to send us pictures and records every year. We have, if you go on our website, you'll see, like in the Pacific Northwest in California, you'll see every city and how many trees we planted all up and down that coast. So we have a pretty good tracking record. It's online, and it's important to keep track of that. And then you'll also see videos on there where 2 years ago, we rebuilt the world's first 3,000-year-old giant sequoia forest up in the Sierra Nevadas to a forest that burned down 3 years ago. But we'd happened to have been in there and cloned 2 of the 3,000-year-old sequoias that were there. One burned down, and we brought back 100 or 200 of the clones and replanted that where they burned down. So that was with school kids. There's a lot of destruction, a lot of devastation everywhere, but that doesn't mean we have to sit on our hands. We can't afford to sit on our hands.
All right, David, I think this is going to be our last question. It's also about invasives. How do we combat the invasive species that have destroyed our ash and beech trees, plus the others that are on the way? What would you suggest planting in northern Michigan?
I would suggest we get an army to go after some of the invasive species because it's going to take the United States military It's gonna take every human being, man, woman, and child, just to go after the invasive species we have here in northern Michigan right now. I mean, we've lost the battle already. The state's not even, it's, that's a really tough question. But, oh boy, we put way too little, way too late on invasive species. And in our Great Lakes, as well as on our land, we're losing the battle. That doesn't mean we're gonna lose it forever, but I don't know, other than an army, a very large army going after these things, how we're gonna get our native habitat back. But we could each do it in our own yard. Everybody take responsibility for their own yard, or their own schoolyard, or their own church, and break it down incrementally like that.
That's very good advice, David. Is there a particular tree that you'd recommend that we all should work on? I mean, black willow sounds pretty good. I mean, we're
Black willows. And at Oriana, the food co-op, on Earth Day and Arbor Day, we'll be giving out black willows up there for free. So if you come down before May or sometime in May, we'll save a few hundred for you to start to
excellent.
revitalize.
Okay, we'll be
And
there. We'll be
we'll get
there.
you in that program.
Very good. Well, we'll say goodbye and thank you to everyone who's attended today, and David, especially you. You've inspired me more than you know. I hope you don't get tired of me bugging you, because I'm going to bug you good.
Well, we're working for the world's grandchildren, and I'll do it till the day I die. So let's put it that.
We are right there with you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch. And thank you, everyone who joined us today.